All right. Hello, everybody. I hope you all can hear me. All right, and I will share my screen in just a moment. Let's see. And there we are. All right, so I hope you all can see that. So my name is Nicole Martinez Martin. I work at Stanford's Center for Biomedical Ethics, and I will start off by, just telling you a little bit about myself. And my background is in law and social sciences. I do qualitative work often in terms of anthropology. Also have a background in law where I started out in actually being interested in criminal law and then legal aid. And that led me into actually a graduate program where I became more interested in interaction between kind of law, society, and neurosciences. Some of my work is I have worked in neuroethics. That includes ethics of neuroscience applications in law. I have also been working more in the ethics of medical AI, particularly looking at the applications, again, within neuroscience, within psychiatry, as well as digital health, which, can apply to predictive analytics and a wide range of different applications. And I have also been interested in equity and inclusion in biomedicine, which includes looking at how development of new technologies can impact different groups differently, as well as, looking at, equity inclusion among researchers who are doing this work, who are doing, other development of AI or other neurotechnologies and so forth. So I really appreciate this opportunity for being a part of this project and for also, having this moment to talk to people today. With this setup, I know, unfortunately, I'll sort of be talking for a bit. I have some opportunities. I use Poll Everywhere, and so hopefully we can see if that will work properly. But also, if there end up being questions near the end, hopefully there will be a way that if anyone has any questions, that we can chat. To start off with, general overview of some of the things I'll be talking about is I'll be talking about some select ethical issues that relate to both mind in vitro, but also these types of projects of using engineered sometimes referred to as kind of multicellular engineered living systems, but systems involving use of neurons as part of whether which can span from organoids to also biobots, of course. And talking, though, as a way of bringing up these ethical issues to get to more of a focus then on responsible development, what it means to be cultivating ethical engagement in different projects, as well as these are going to be dovetailing also with some issues of communication. So I had the opportunity to speak, or actually through my my research assistant, we had the opportunity to talk to several people involved in these projects in order to see, just some of the different kinds of ethical issues that came up, what the sense of ethical engagement in the project was. It was really lovely being able to talk to people, and I will be touching on a few of those issues that came up as I go through this talk. Specifically, some of the things I'll be touching on in terms of ethical issues are moral consideration, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. What kinds of duties or obligations may be perceived in doing these kinds of projects, as well as then moving on to these issues of responsible development and application. So in using neurons as part of these engineered projects, I'm sure as you're all aware, it's come up in different ways of what does it mean to engage that? Can they be thought of simply as sort of parts? Maybe while they may have been part of a living being previously, does that mean that they're anything other, or that what you are resulting from it should be thought of as anything other than, simply having used some parts in order to, engineer, something that can move or that can do computing, but is there anything sort of beyond that? And that gets to, these complicated questions of, when something has moral consideration and what it is, as you all are working in this area of, what it means to sort of engage in this in terms of what different perspectives there might be on whether there is some moral standing or moral consideration that needs to be given to these resulting creations. And so, you may start out by considering just whether, something is, when does it have moral standing? That when is it that something is a subject of, some sort of moral attitude or some kind of moral principle that might be applied to it, as with a living being. Moral consideration, has come up a lot, of course, in non-human animal research. What level of moral consideration might a rat or a mouse have, and different standpoints on what are the different factors or considerations that you might have in giving them a certain amount of moral consideration, as well as, is it simply being a living being conveys or confers some sort of moral consideration on an entity. When we're looking, often people will point to things like elements of intelligence, often comes up too. That, is it enough to have some sort of element of intelligence or adaptability in order to say that that confers some sort of moral standing, that if something can, have an experience or respond to something around it in a way that that we think that that being is, recognizing, having some sort of, sentience, is that enough to say that there's some moral standing? And then, of course, obviously, as you also see with non-human animal research, that doesn't simply mean a sort of on or off switch in terms of, what follows from that moral consideration, but rather often it comes in a sort of gradation of, how much of a moral consideration then that we think that that particular entity, should have, that, of not allowing it to have pain, for example, versus, not not doing, research on it entirely. There's also in this area, and here I also need to sort of separate out, there is the part of whether, one thinks there should be moral consideration given to this particular being. But there's also the perception of, whether in the public's eyes or otherwise, that certain types of behavior or certain types of ways that something might be created might confer at least some kind of semblance of moral consideration to it. And so in some instances, when you have, for example, robots, biobots, things that may mimic certain behaviors or sort of lifelike ways of being, those questions can also come up, that, whether even if you don't think that there is really an obligation to that particular entity that's been created of the moral consideration, does it still need to be explained or dealt with in some way in order to deal with the perceptions that, someone looking at that creation might have? And also, in this area, what's come up because of analogies to again, whether it's non-human animals or to, ways of thinking about kind of environmental considerations, whether there might be a role of that creation according to its social context, where there still needs to be some wrestling with or some way of addressing what kind of moral consideration may come up with that particular being or entity. So, on the left, that is Hitchbot, which is fully robotic, does not use any sort of living neuron elements or otherwise. But I bring this up in the way that sort of social context or the social uses of a particular creation can sometimes bring up these questions of moral consideration. So Hitchbot is this really cute little robot that was sent hitchhiking around the world. There were some really sweet stories coming out of it of how people interacted with Hitchbot over time. But there were also, people where, Hitchbot ultimately sort of met its demise through, people deciding to sort of break it, attack it, or otherwise. And I bring this up in the sense that I think most people would agree that sort of as a robot, there wasn't something, some inherent moral consideration of it the same way it would be as if, a sort of dog or, other kind of animal was being hurt in this way. But because of the social context of having this sort of friendly robot out there, maybe doing good or otherwise, is what it means for the sort of human beings interacting with it to treat it in a particular way and not give it at least some sort of consideration. And these kinds of questions came up. I think another example of this type of moral question when it comes up, if any of you are familiar with Westworld, where robots were created for entertainment value, and in this sort of playground, those robots may have been sort of treated in ways, recipients of sort of humans treating them violently or otherwise, and it coming up then of again that that robot or that creation may not have some sort of inherent moral consideration, but its role in a particular context of what it means for the humans to be treating it in a certain way can bring up some aspects of moral consideration. And the picture on the right is a sort of rescue. A cyborg cockroach used for kind of earthquake, or it's a prototype being used for, earthquake rescue operations. And again, where you have, in this case, a cockroach, something that people don't necessarily think of always, sort of inherently moral consideration. But then these questions come up of it sort of melding it to human purposes. Will it, have any pain in this process or otherwise, may bring up some of those questions of moral consideration in a way that wouldn't otherwise when, always necessarily just thinking of sort of insects or otherwise. There's also, and I'm bringing this up, in terms of the different perspectives that can come out when, in this area of working with matter that comes from a living being, where sometimes concerns can come up. This idea of playing God. What this picture is of a zebrafish that has been genetically modified to have these more kind of glow in the dark colors. This was from 20 years ago that that these concerns came up. But one of the concerns that came up, this didn't seem to harm the zebrafish in terms of it feeling pain or having a shortened lifespan. But there were some concerns about, raised at the time, of when you're doing this kind of genetic engineering, what it means to, have that role in, playing with the sort of matter of life. Now, many, and including myself, think that, this is an argument that can often get fairly easily refuted, because if you look at the long history of humankind, whether it's, agriculture, animal husbandry, way before we get these more technological advancements, that people have been, making these modifications to life around us. That doesn't necessarily always make that right, but in terms of this particular argument that it's somehow sort of inherently a problem to be, sort of playing God, as I said, is the phrase sometimes used in this way. That that part is often easily refuted, and instead moving more to what kinds of issues might this moral considerability be grounded in. How should we think of when it matters? And in some cases it might be the origin of the cells, whether it's human or non-human, and of course in the particular project here with cells coming from mice initially, that often in terms of perception of what kind of moral considerability is granted to something often lessens that sense that some sort of that there's a bigger sort of moral considerability. In looking at some of the articles out there on ethics of using living neurons for computers, this often is a sort of big thing that comes up, is whether those cells might come from human or non-human sources. The complexity of the structure, of course, also, what is being built, if it's something that's more complex, more simple, and with more complexity, often, bringing more thought to, or people sort of spending more time thinking about, whether there might be some moral consideration that needs to be brought to bear on the particular question. And again, what their role is of, what's being created in social context. So with, for the analogy with genetic modification, with, zebrafish, there were also some rabbits that were genetically modified to be bioluminescent. And when they were used for an art project, that in some cases bothered people more, with thinking that perhaps, making, perhaps, doing genetic modification for something that was a sort of arts project, was that sufficiently serious? Did that confer enough benefit in doing this particular project, even though, otherwise it didn't harm or cause pain to the being? Is that something then that changes, how we calculate or how we think about the moral consideration to be given in that particular project or in that particular approach? And again, as I spoke to some of the researchers on this project, you could very much see that, as we talked about, or as ethical issues were talked about, that these types of things were touched upon in terms of, how people decide to, sort of think through and structure their response regarding this moral consideration. That, as I said, the origin from, mouse neurons, often, this question of, when those neurons are used, are they done in a way that is, humane with consideration to the non-human animal that they're being taken from, as well as, pointing out that, the structures, the crunch structures are more, are not on the more sort of complex side at the moment. And so these are the kinds of things that come up understandably, and when people are, making these sort of decisions about, when to grant, when to confer moral consideration. And in here, in particular in this project, one of the things that can come up, in terms of working with neurons, is, this question of, is there a danger down the line, or is there a possibility down the line of the development of consciousness? And I'm kind of smiling and saying this because when I first first started getting involved in this project, and looking at some of the existing media on this, that came up in a number of articles, whether it was popular articles or otherwise, as the sort of big ethical concern, big sort of danger, was this development of consciousness. At the same time, talking to researchers, of course, for mind in vitro, that issue is considered unlikely, for a number of reasons, in terms of the number of neurons being used, what and how that and the resulting complexity of the particular resulting creations, where it's considered unlikely. I'm smiling as in partly because, though, in sort of early drafts of this, this of course gets a lot of attention, and so sort of thinking it through as part of the project is also at the same time having to think through, how does this get communicated so that there's not a sort of overhyping, and yet at the same time it does get thought through in a way that people who are looking at these kinds of projects can see that it's been given due consideration. And just in talking to some of the researchers here, I have a couple quotes following. So as I said, there was some definitely sort of referencing that, first of all, that, these are mouse neurons, that, relatively small number, in terms of sort of saying that these kinds of concerns for this project, are not ones that are, of immediate or direct concern. But at the same time, some things coming up about, still there being, especially over time, and as things may be made that have somewhat more complexity, what might those concerns be, and really in some ways a sort of unknowability, as even though even though overall there was a fair sort of assurance that as long as there's the relatively small number of neurons, these things wouldn't be conscious. If they are, they'd be minimally conscious. Another person sort of saying, other than the sort of stimulation, it's, of course, even unclear without a sort of interpretive apparatus, what that even means. This analogy, to running over an insect with your car, but at the same time, sort of what that actually might mean in terms of moral consideration, that insects even might have some level of moral consideration that you might give them. And what those kind of implications were, if there was a sort of culture of neurons in a dish that has some feeling to it, then someone might feel or moral obligation for that resulting creation to not feel pain. And so these questions come up of sort of what would make that moral consideration, if there's some possibility of it feeling pain. Yeah, sort of acknowledging that and sort of thinking through what that might mean. And this goes towards, as I said, part of it, and I'm trying to choose my words because I very much am not trying to be that ethicist who is sort of overhyping this at this moment. at all. But sort of acknowledging that in doing projects that there's also the sort of thinking through of what might be important to think about sort of down the line for the line, the type of research being done, as well as, what kinds of questions that might, that might be part of the conversation, even if it is to say at this moment, or, in the next several years, this does not seem to be a concern. And this certainly comes up with looking at organoids in this area of multicellular engineered living systems, but acknowledging at least that there's certain things where if there is sort of conscience or sentience, there's not really a way to sort of measure or detect what we might refer to as consciousness. And so sort of acknowledging that as part of it, even though overall, there are, not the concerns of this coming up, for the particular project, but more sort of thinking through in this area of research, sort of acknowledging, the questions that still might arise and may be of concern down the line with different projects. So we'll see if this particularly works for looking at this. So there's a QR code. You can also go to pollev.com /Nicole Martin 797 for this particular poll. And the question is, in terms of labeling. So, in terms of labeling the kinds of projects at work in Mind in Vitro, how might you, or how do you tend to think of it? Simply as a tool? Do you think of it as something that has, any sort of, agent part to it, as objects, creatures, simply parts, property, or nature? So if you take a moment to look at that, we can sort of see, let's see. Or if you have problems accessing it, please let me know. Let's see. All right. Oops. All right, so all right, so let's see if it sometimes can you see sometimes it doesn't come through on my slide, but let's see. But we have creature and tools so far coming up as a sort of main a main response. So thank you. So tools, creatures, and different ways of thinking it. We do have someone saying sort of property. I like the person who says yes, which I assume is a kind of all of the above kind of way of thinking about it. And let's see. Sorry, I have had that. There it is coming up in the slide now. All right. All right. So, and I just sort of brought that up as a question because, just to sort of as a reminder that, these kinds of ways of labeling or of characterizing. So, for a number of times where, tools came up, these very much relate to sort of how then, people then think of any associated sort of moral consideration involved. And that way of of labeling it and characterizing it can be important, both in terms of communication, communication of your research or otherwise, but also sort of recognizing that those combinations of bringing up, that it's a tool, that the neurons come from non-human animals, very much interrelates then with, what kinds of moral consideration might be considered necessary, as well as, what kinds of might follow from it. So, for the answer that, put creature, then, there might be some associated, not like sort of a high bar to clear, but there might be some associated thoughts of, protection from harm, for a resulting creature. Generally when we think of rights and obligations, that tends to be more moral consideration that comes along with an entity or a being that, as we start thinking of it as having sort of more higher level functions, or some intelligence. But as part of that, in terms of responsible development, there's sort of what moral consideration might be involved, but also as part of responsible development, these processes for raising these concerns are often needed. That, as part of the project, that if someone has these kinds of concerns, making sure that there's processes, avenues for conversation about it, or ways of sort of thinking about it. So then I have a another question, and let me just first activate the next poll. So this one is a question of, let's see, a question that has more to do with, what types of projects do you think might have more benefits for society? So they're, part of responsible development, and I'll be talking a little bit more about this, but part of responsible development is, thinking through, sort of what kinds of projects might, whether it's sort of answering questions, simply answering questions that might be of benefit to society, or, certain types of projects, who gets to sort of select those projects. As I mentioned, for example, while I disagree about, sort of art projects not having societal benefit, there have been some times that, having a project that has more sort of an artistic bent, that some have questioned that benefit for society. So let's see. There we are. So let's see. Sorry, this, unfortunately, it's not coming up on my screen quite as. All right, so neuroscience got kind of a big star here. Neuromuscular junction. So, these types of projects where you might have, these sort of questions, and you can see this idea of, sort of a particular disease screening tools. And so, this is just more meant to bring up that, these are important conversations to be having about, sort of what, who gets these choices of what kinds of projects, have the attention, and obviously funding. Funding is a big component of this. But, also sort of thinking through sort of who gets a voice in this, who gets a voice in these kinds of choices. And I really appreciate, you have projects with medical applications, but this is also, obviously in our current day, these are really interesting answers about, what types of projects might you think might have more benefit, learning how to compute with less energy, creative computing, disease screening tools, neuromuscular junctions. And these can all be just really sort of helpful, to keep in mind as these projects move through to, oh, here we are, it's finally appearing. As we sort of move through to, different applications, in the future, how these decisions get made about what kinds of projects are seen as having more benefit, which ones might be seen as having more risk in terms of potential downside, And I also bring this up because, certainly with animal research, non-human animal research, one of the questions that can get raised is, what kind of benefit is worth, some potential harms, to a non-human animal. And that's where it gets balanced with the benefit, and where it can be also useful to sort of talk through, what people see as these particular benefits in this area. And so, again, talking through in this area of responsible development. So, moral consideration, and here I'm talking more specifically about this project that, if there's some potential moral consideration downstream, or something where right now, what you're working on, there doesn't seem to be as much as much concern about having the sort of moral consideration with the living neurons itself. But if we're sort of thinking what might be the potential, or what downstream, what kind of practices can help prepare, and again, appreciating that you all have this sort of touchstone on having some ethicists involved. It can also, though, be part of having as part of the sort of general research what kind of reflection might be happening in conversations in the lab or otherwise, what kind of horizon scanning, that these kinds of practices can be helpful for sort of keeping an eye on where research is going, what kinds of practices might be important to adopt now, so that they become a part of the practices in these fields. One other area are deliberation practices, and this may be more at the sort of professional level, or at the level of the field, rather than just in in a particular lab. But one example that gets given of deliberation among researchers comes from Asilomar in the 1970s, when there was work on recombinant DNA, genetically engineered organisms, and there was concern about where leadership was coming from in that area, what kinds of guidance might be needed in order to work with recombinant DNA responsibly. And so on the one hand, Asilomar, which is the name of the location where scientists came together to develop, guidance on this. And the picture that's on the slide comes from Asilomar. And they came together, and it's often pointed to as a an accomplishment in the field of sort of showing how scientists themselves can be motivated by concern for responsible development in an area and come together. But it also, and this is sort of in talking through, what kinds of practices now are advocated for. But Asilomar was criticized for a lack of inclusion of different perspectives. In some cases, that can reflect the field at the time, a sort of less inclusive field, but they also mean that it was sort of scientists on high, and not necessarily engaging with perspectives of the public, what their concerns might be, or what their priorities might be, about what for safety, or for ethical concerns. They also could have thought through sort of different perspectives when it came through to different disciplines. What the perspectives of people in the humanities, or social sciences might have been, looking at the past. And I will say, because of my interaction with looking at ethics of AI, it's really it's really blown me away how important it is to have the voices of historians, especially, but other social scientists, because many times people think that in their sort of, because of this new amazing technology, that, they're encountering entirely new different issues about the impact on society. And yet, there's so much to be learned about, whether in AI, there's so much to be learned, whether it's from the history of computing, or other areas of technological advancement on how those can have societal impacts downstream. And so having different disciplines as well as public voices that can be integrated can be really really important and really helpful for inclusion in deliberation in these areas. There's also, some newer approaches in deliberation, whether it's consensus conferences that are more inclusive, that bring together people with a range of different expertise. Some types of this, you may have heard of a Delphi study that brings in sort of a number of people from different expertise, including often at least, someone representing sort of public advocates or otherwise who can participate and sort of talk through what kinds of ethical or social impact there might be. There's public participation approaches for how do you engage the public for the types of ethical concerns, types of social concerns that they might have. And there's also, for example, in this area of responsible innovation, there's been a lot of work in the past decade, including this work by Stilgrow et al. On responsible research indicators. What are things that you can look to look for, how that research is being done responsibly. I put this first one in with a bit of a smile of, inclusion of ethics from the beginning. Of course, the ethicist advocates for that, but it's also just sort of a reminder that often where more issues have arisen is when, whether it's sort of ethical or social impact, when it's thought of as something to be engaged, sort of down the line. But often, even from the beginning of choice of project, how the project is being developed, this kind of engagement of different perspectives can be very important. And there's different types of outreach efforts. That's where, with a nod to the speaker before me, you can really already see in how, I want to make sure to note, I'm bringing this up just as in, types of ways that people have engaged this, but you can see, whether it's from, sort of the NSF involvement as well as from the project itself, these sort of thoughts about education, community engagement, outreach efforts, already are a part of, how Minds in Vitro is being conducted. And this can be really important as part of, this area of responsible development. During the project, having avenues for getting feedback from the public, interdisciplinary input early on. Also, it can become, important aspects. And this also, comes from a sort of outline of, doing responsible research strategies in this area of, multicellular engineered living systems, and looks at specific steps. So maintain sensitivity to questions regarding moral considerability, focus on actual science, societal needs, from sort of early on. Look at ways and design choices sort of early on to sort of talk about the trade-offs that if you adopt one design, what might be sort of social, ethical implications down the line, what kind of values inform those choices and trade-offs. And, sort of organizing these events, initiatives that have a sort of two-way communication. And so I'm not going to go through all of these, but these really are sort of different areas of developing responsibly, and also making sure that there's these institutional mechanisms that help support ethical engagement, responsible engagement when you're in these areas of new technologies, that of sort of collaborating with different disciplines, incentivizing integration of these different perspectives in the project, and having these, collaborations and public engagement that really help with both sort of communication, but also, can be a part of, responding to concerns that might be out there about, how the particular project might impact the society or otherwise. And for institutional mechanisms, obviously there's a lot going on at the funder level, what kind of requirements there are of proposals. And again, in recent years, there's really been movement in these areas for fostering more interdisciplinarity, asking for more community engagement, making sure to bring in more diverse perspectives. But they're also, in a new emerging area like this, like multicellular engineered living systems areas, there might be these questions about, and here I put IRB because it might be organoids, but it might be sort of different areas. But if there is a sort of ethical review, are there things that that there might be a need a supplement for them, either a different review or a way of giving additional information to them for them to better understand particular issues, sensitive issues in this area? Might there be a need for additional entities for ethical guidance? I know in the area of AI, for example, there's been some, interesting experiments right now with, what kinds of mechanisms might be there. There are some ethical review boards specific to AI that some institutions have that where there's more expertise, sort of specific to the types of projects, but also, where, instead of sort of saying yes or no to a project, it just gives feedback of saying, hey, have you thought of this particular downstream implication of this? Have you thought that perhaps the way that the AI affects this particular group, marginalized group or other, group of people with disability may need to be thought through before you proceed with the project. And so those are examples of different types of mechanisms that might be experimented with in these areas of new technology. And then also, because this is a retreat and looking at, sort of how research groups function, these sort of ethics in, and I've been very happy, pleased to see the kinds of practices involved. But, just sort of a reminder that as part of, responsible development, that's where these types of practices that help support, mutual trust, that help share the vision across different researchers and different levels, whether it's postdocs, undergraduates that you've talked about being a part of the project, having this more open communication, mutual trust, because overall that can help also in supporting, responsible development, that you have these ways of sharing concerns. With the number of disciplines involved, there also may be a need for talking through sometimes shared language, across disciplines that, even ways of talking about data. And I found this, in the area that you find among even, in genomics areas where you have, in theory, they're all, in genomics, but they may have very different ways of talking about, the particular ways that they're approaching a project, what their goals are or otherwise. And so, taking those moments to sort of really look for, am I using these words? Am I having a sort of different way of talking about this that needs to be recognized so that we can make sure that people are on the same page. And this sometimes also can get referred to as a epistemic orientation, that different disciplines, whether it's, sort of data scientists, whether it's biologists, whether otherwise, that they might have certain, because of the professional goals, there may be sort of different ways they think through, even how to formulate a problem that it may help to talk through as a research team so that people can, ensure having these shared goals. And again, this is something where I think, today's retreat and seeing how it's set up, that, mentorship is a very important part of research. And that's where I'm just also underlining, looking at these mentorship practices is also a very important part of ethical research, in terms of setting clear standards for conduct, of encompassing discussions about ethical practice and research as part of professional development, as part of making sure that people know, if the questions come up, who do they talk to, knowing that there's openness, to these types of concerns and inclusion of diverse perspectives as part of this all. And that includes encouraging conversations, or including as part of the conversation, conversations that address the downstream implications. This also, came up in the interviews that were conducted, with some of your researchers, was, sort of acknowledging that with emergent characteristics, there might always be sort of question marks of, how do you address that there might be some emergent characteristics with, things that are being built? Is there any need to sort of think through, how that gets designed, or concerns about it? Dual use, also, dual use refers to that, something that may be made with the thought of beneficial use may also have, uses down the line where it could be put to whether misuse, or more negative uses that maybe need to be talked about or thought about more, sort of down the line. And so just to sort of end on a more end with a little bit more on schedule. I'll skip those particular questions, but it's just sort of putting it out there that, those can be very important to think through. Are those sort of potential for misuse as well, and whether that's something that needs to be thought of in terms of how things are designed or developed now. But also, what came up are these concerns about also science communication, and how media, especially media, which may often sort of oversimplify or be looking for a way to sort of hype concerns about a particular project. That certainly came up in regards to, sort of development of consciousness in these types of projects. How to address these moral considerations when reporting on a project, how to avoid hype. Sometimes, sometimes, of course, it is having that interdisciplinarity, engaging people on the team who may have more experience in science communications, to sort of help navigate, how the research is being communicated, to sort of balance off both acknowledging any social implications while at the same time, trying to avoid that kind of overhyping of potential harms. Thinking through, sort of metaphors that may be used, that, sometimes sort of underlining the sort of machine characteristics, as opposed to the kind of living neuron, can help, sort of address that, what you may be wanting to communicate in terms of, what the potential is of what is actually being created at this moment. And then I also just wanted to sort of highlight, this is one of my colleagues here, is the first author, Daphne Marchenko, but this was something that was done in genomic studies recently. Was they have an open access repository of explanatory documents that are sort of FAQs on genomic studies, because of the way that they found that, sort of reporting on genomic analyses also often very much had these problems of, sort of overhyping, or at the same time not acknowledging, particular ways that the genomic analyses might be misunderstood or misused downstream. And so what they came up with was that, that researchers in this area can provide a sort of a document that explains, different aspects of the type of research that they're doing, that becomes a part of also sort of media kits or otherwise, that can help also with with communication. And, these are types of approaches, types of projects that I think, other areas of research might also consider in terms of, having this sort of both responsible development, but also working on the communication of, responsible development in these areas. So with that, thank you very much for your time. I'm guessing time-wise that there's not time for additional questions, but please always, feel free if anyone has any questions in these areas to please reach out. And I do hope.
Thank you, Nicole.
Yeah, I do hope at some point to have the chance to speak to more of you, because I do find it really beneficial to sort of talk through and hear these different perspectives.
Thanks, Nicole, for bringing in this perspective. So I have a question. Maybe we can have just a minute. So yeah, I think it's very useful that you have been able to talk to some of us. What are your plans like moving forward? I mean, of course, we are happy. I mean, we want to support as much as possible, and vice versa, integrate all the ideas that you have in our research. So what are your thoughts?
Well, I think actually, and I'll reach out because, a number of the PIs very helpfully, gave me some initial people to contact. I think, talking to some additional researchers, I think would be really helpful in this area, because that also can help not just in not just in sort of creating a sort of understanding of your all perspectives, but also in seeing what areas I might be of more help in consultation with, so that at a future point, sort of working with talking to different researchers out there, I might also see where whether it's something that I've already talked about today that might be expanded upon, or whether there might be a sort of area of consultation where I might help provide, just some more tools or some more frameworks for talking that through. I very much would like to see where both where your needs are, but also I think in this area and talking through the ethics of this area, being able to talk more to some of the different researchers and put some more of these ethical questions sort of out there for consideration, I think is part of the plan moving forward.
All right. Well, sure. We'll coordinate to make all of this happen. Also, of course, you are very welcome to come here in person if you have the chance. So that also might be useful. You might see the lab and talk to people in person also can be helpful. Anyone has any question?